Great. So in this seminar, we would like to focus actually on on the idea of cooperatives and including worker cooperatives in the Netherlands, and whether cooperatives can play a role in the democratizing and the greening of the economy. So that's the question of today's seminar. What kind of potential is there? What kind of obstacles are on the way to cooperatives to play such role in society? These are all questions that we'll be discussing today. So we have so the seminar is today's webinar is organized as follows. So we have three great speakers, and each of them we will be speaking for 10 and 15 minutes, or 10 to 15 minutes. And the second part of the webinar is an open discussion where everybody from the audience can engage, ask questions, and intervene on whatever has been said before. So we will not be having interventions after each separate presentation, but everybody will first present, and then we will have the discussion. So our three speakers for today, and we will reverse a little bit the order as proposed from the order that's proposed on the website. So we will start with Marijke Vlamman, who is a senior cooperative consultant and the National Cooperative Council NCR in the Netherlands. And with her legal and fiscal expertise, she advises cooperative entrepreneurs on matters such as the choice for cooperative model or the relationship between board supervisor and members. So our second speaker, who I'm afraid is not here yet, but maybe we expect that he will still join us in the course of the meeting, is Thijs Spargaren, who is a coordinator and board member of the Schoon Gewoon Netherlands, collaboration of 10 worker cooperatives in the B2B cleaning sector. And our third speaker is Professor Tine de Moer, who is a professor in social enterprise and institutions for collective action at the Rotterdam School of Management. So without further ado, I will invite Marijke Vlamman to just start with her presentation. And Marijke, you have up to 15 minutes. Please go ahead, and we are looking forward to listening to your talk. You're muted.
So sorry. Thank you. When I was invited by Damien some months ago, I'm not sure, I was quite honored, but also a bit surprised about the topic I was invited to speak, to join. Because the fact is we have I think I might play a very modest role in this seminar, and I will explain later why. So first about the Dutch Cooperative Council. Maybe it's nice for you to know about the background. In the Netherlands, we have the Dutch Cooperative Council, and we ourselves, NCR, we are an association formed by members being cooperatives. So we have very large cooperatives in the Netherlands, a lot of them agricultural, it's a terrible word to pronounce, financial industry, but also latest in the health sector, the building industry, etc. What we do, being this association, we try to provide our members with services like advising on the issue how to be a cooperative that works nicely in the interest of its members. It's a challenge day and night being a cooperative. And so we deal with that aspect of the structure legal and tax aspects, but also about aspects of concerning member commitment. We try to form a platform for our members to share knowledge, to develop knowledge, and to connect with each other. And last but not least, we try to do some lobby work regarding cooperatives towards the Dutch government. So this is what we are. And as Vladimir told you, my background is a legal one. The point I try to make is we have very few members being worker cooperatives. And I never realized this is strange until Damien gave me a phone call. But it is strange, of course, because all around us, especially in Southern Europe, we see lots of worker cooperatives. So I think it might be nice to discuss the reasons why this is so different in the Netherlands. And I, for myself, thought of 2 or 3 possible reasons. But to be quite frank, NCR, the Dutch Cooperative Council, we did not conduct any research about the reason why there are so few worker cooperatives in the Netherlands. We did, though, conduct research about the numbers, the figures of all cooperatives existing in the Netherlands in 2016. The latest research was done in 2020. And we divided all the cooperatives in sectors. The health sector, agricultural sector, the building industry, just freelancers. And what we have as a number, and I can present that one to you, is in the Netherlands there are 9,600 cooperatives registered at the Dutch Chamber of Commerce, and only 77 of them are registered as worker cooperatives. So it's nothing compared to Spain, Italy, Greece. And those 77 cooperatives registered as worker cooperatives are even not 100% worker cooperatives. So also, you won't know Odin, but Odin is a chain of supermarkets. Well, I cannot give you an international example. Belhaven, maybe it's a nice example. It's formed by this cooperative by members being consumers and contracting parties, and also some of the higher staff of the cooperative. There are reasons why these persons also became a member of the cooperative. So it's a multi-stakeholder cooperative, in fact, not a real worker cooperative. So I think it might be nice to discuss the background of this huge difference between the countries, the various countries in Europe. So I think this is my contribution for now. Maybe nice to nice to know that Schoon Gewoon, Vladimir just mentioned Schoon Gewoon, Dutch cooperative presented by its director Thijs Spaargaren. Vladimir, I just tried to chat on a personal chat. Okay, he is one of our members of NCR, Dutch Cooperative Council, and Schoon Gewoon is a real 100% worker cooperative formed by former freelancers of a certain company who decided to take over control and be worker cooperative. So we consider Schoon Gewoon as a very special cooperative, because in the community of members of NCR, it's a bit of a standalone cooperative. I might say it's the only 100% worker cooperative we know at NCR. I think this is for now. Thank you. Does anybody have questions, or Vladimir, is it for afterwards, after Tina?
Yeah, no, thank you, Marijke. This is great as an initial input. We will come back to your intervention in the discussion round. So meanwhile, we have heard from Thijs, who unfortunately is not able to join us today due to some personal issues that have come his way. So that's really unfortunate, because we were very much looking forward to cooperative representative at today's panel, but nothing to be done about that. So in any case, Marijke, you know Schoon Gewoon, and maybe we'll be able to say something more on this in the discussion, but we'll come on the structure, on the incentives to actually all these freelancers to group themselves in the form of a worker cooperative. So we can discuss this in some greater detail in the discussion. Since we have one presentation less, that means more discussion time. In any case, we will move now with the intervention of Professor Tina de Moor, and after that we can open the discussion for everyone. So Tina, please go ahead, and if you have PowerPoints or something, I should enable you to share.
Yes, you should. I can't right now. Well,
Yeah.
Thank you, Vladimir, for organizing together with Damien and Lisa this session. And great to see some familiar faces online as well. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that Thijs is not coming and maybe go a bit slower in my presentation, if that's fine.
Yes.
I can talk very fast, but I could also try to do a bit slower, and that's maybe in the benefit of all of you.
Yeah,
Let me try to share my screen first. Okay, so I would like to do a number of things during my presentation. There we go. I'm not sure about the, oh yeah, there's some, I'm not sure about the animations. I didn't have time to check all of that. So maybe something strange happens, but yeah, I would like to do a number of things during my presentation. I have quite a few slides, but Vladimir, do interrupt me if I'm taking too much time. So what I would like to discuss with you is, first of all, put the wider development of changes in work, in how we work, and how this is organized, and also collectively in a broader perspective. Of course, there's the COVID-19, which did highlight some changes, but I don't think we should overrate the changes it has brought along, because if we look at what has happened before that, I will show you there have been already quite a few changes taking place in both, well, the way we organize Social Security that goes with working, especially for self-employed, but also development of platform cooperatives, for example. And also just a peek, I would like just a little bit of information about development and deliberative democracy, which are also part, I think, of the framework in which we organize our work. So that's a bit of the context. And then I would like to present you to a model which we call within our research team the Cicada model, the Strategies for Institutions for Collective Action and Development model, to give you maybe a more analytical view of how institutions for collective action, such as worker cooperatives, such as platform cooperatives, can be analyzed. So it's a sort of tool that helps you to analyze it and also helps you to look in the long term. And that is something I would also like to do, putting not just in the broader context in terms of content, but also in terms of changes over time. I think we will then see that there's some changes over time. There's some developments also in other types of cooperatives that actually might help to inspire worker cooperatives, platform cooperatives to follow a specific path, but more about that later on. So that's a bit what I would like to do today. Now let's start with the COVID impact. Well, it's just, I mean, we're not even out of the whole pandemic, basically, but we did see some changes during the pandemic in different ways. I think on the one hand, you saw, well, for many people, increasing job insecurity. People resorted more to income pooling because temporarily they didn't have a job. But on the other hand, it also, of course, changed our perspective on what we expect from work, from the workplace, from the degree of autonomy we get in our work. And there's quite a bit going on, especially now with the very tight labor market, with a lot of jobs on offer. There's talk also of the great resignation coming from the US to Europe, whereby people are more easily change jobs. So I think workplace control, where you work and what you do and why you work, has really been questioned quite substantially during the whole period, the whole epidemic. And it has already translated in some new trends on in the global labor market. We've also seen quite a few challenges in terms of globalization and the effect it had on consumers with higher retail prices. We're facing that, of course, even more now in the current situation. Also reduced income. People had to cut down on some specific incomes, but at the same time, of course, also the attention that was growing for the risk of, slowing down the supply chain. And there are a lot of risks that come with globalization in terms of supply chains. A consequence of that, for example, has been a growth in the produce being sold by local farmers. That got a huge increase during the whole pandemic. Of course, we also see people looking for new business models that are linked to urbanization. People want to source their goods more locally. And there's also more consumer awareness growing, at least. But of course, prices could put that under pressure. So that's a bit of a global perspective, global perspective on what has been going on during the pandemic. But as I said, we've also seen some changes taking place in the organization of basically every type of resource sourcing, you could say, over the past 15 to 20 years. Already since the year 2005, it became apparent that a lot of citizens are trying to find alternative ways to source, for example, their renewable energy, but also food, also care, and also insurance. And this is an overview of just a few sectors, just 4 sectors, in which we've seen citizen collectives, you can use that as a sort of generic term. In academia, we use the term institutional collective action more. You see that emerging, in this case, across the Netherlands, but it's broader than this. In many countries, you also see similar developments, not necessarily in the same sectors, but in the Netherlands has been quite omnipresent in most of the sectors. Now, what is interesting about this is that although you see this type of new governance, whereby people, citizens form new organizations to create and use resources such as insurance, but also energy, food, care collectively. You do see it emerging everywhere, but the motivations to do so are often quite different. For example, on the left-hand side, you see an example of the new mutual insurance developments in the Netherlands, the so-called Breadfunds. I'll say a little bit more about that later. People there really set it up because there is no more provision of insurance for self-employed anymore in the Netherlands since quite a while. On the other hand, on the right-hand side, you see energy cooperatives popping up next to commercial initiatives. So basically, there is, on the one hand, a growth of these collectives in sectors like insurance, because there's no good alternative. The commercial alternatives are too expensive. The government no longer provides it, the insurance. So people set it up out of misery, so to speak. On the other hand, energy is set up, energy cooperatives are often set up because, well, there is an opportunity both in organization, as an organization, but also financially, there can be an opportunity to create a well-run energy cooperative that actually also delivers a dividend in due time. And in between, you see a variety of the sectors in between. There's a variety of motivations, both out of misery and out of opportunity, so to speak. So there is a broad development going on with different motivations. Well, as I said, it goes also beyond the boundaries of the Netherlands. It's not just about physical resources. It's also about, for example, these insurances. You see it not just in the insurance of health insurance or job insurance, but also the insurance of goods, for example, in different countries. We've seen both physical, but also virtual platforms being developed to insure even cars, whatever, all sorts of different goods. So it's this new sort of return of the mutual, so to speak, is quite present. Also, for example, in forms of micro-insurance, so to speak, rotating and saving systems. It's something that we find in many different countries, either because they've been set up by, for example, ethnic groups. You find them in many large cities, in Amsterdam, in Brussels, but also in countries like in the Caribbean, you see that they are redeveloped. So, for example, a new digital format has been developed to set these roskas, as we call them, up. As I said, the Breadfunds are quite popular in the Netherlands. We've seen them growing a lot over the past 10 years now. Since 2012, they really started. So by now, nearly 30,000 people in the Netherlands, self-employed, are a member of a Breadfund. A Breadfund is maximum 50 people, 50 members, no more. Then you have to set up a new Breadfund. Of course, if we compare the total number of self-employed in a Breadfund with the total number of self-employed overall, which is over 1.5 million, then of course it's a very marginal part of the population, but still it's quite substantial how many Breadfunds have developed to give people security. Similar, the platform cooperatives are popping up all over the place as well. In the Netherlands, it's not going very fast, especially not when as Marijke already said, worker cooperatives are not very present in the Netherlands, but here and there you do see initiatives like Co-op Cycle taking form. And I think we also have to connect this to more political, policy-related movements worldwide, whereby people are experimenting, citizens are experimenting with new forms of representation, of participation in the political process through various forms of instruments such as citizens' assemblies, G1000s, citizen councils. There's a lot of different types going around, a lot of experimentation taking place, especially in Europe. Just a moment. I think they are related to this new development of citizen collectives, but it goes beyond that as well. I think most of the deliberative democracy instruments we see popping up are examples of participation. I've put them here in a matrix to show you sort of an evolution of the intensity of participation of citizens in policymaking. On the left-hand side, just a mere form of representation whereby you elect people. But of course, there's more intensive participatory process as well, whereby people participate, for example, in the selection of a citizen budget, G1000s. And on the right-hand side, I've added the independent collectives, which are basically a sort of, it can be a form of co-creation, but not necessarily. Many of these energy cooperatives that have popped up, for example, decide not to work together with local governments because they find it difficult. They find it not very helpful to work with civil servants sometimes. So they decide to really work independently from this whole representative democracy or deliberative democracy development. And they really are separate organizations. On the other hand, we also see examples whereby there's close co-creation with local governments. So it's not always a separate movement. But this is just to give you an idea where it fits in a broader perspective of the deliberative democracy. Now, as I said, and this is more of a bit of a context, a broader context. So it's not just in the domain of work that a lot is happening. And in fact, maybe work is the place where the least of these developments are taking place. As Marieke said, there are not that many worker cooperatives in the Netherlands. The platform cooperatives are just popping up. There's definitely countries like France, Spain, where worker cooperatives are far more present. It's actually more in the insurance sector where you see these insurance of workers, and also in the domain of self-employed, forming a sort of entrepreneurs cooperative, so more producers cooperative. There you see some developments, but overall the other sectors, I mean, when it comes down to energy production, when it comes to care, I think in those domains you see a far larger development taking place. It's really more dominant than in the organization of work. I think Schoon Gewoon so far is still one of the few worker cooperatives in the true sense of the word with workers. You also see some, as I said, entrepreneurs who rather consider themselves as self-employed working together, but really worker cooperatives, they're very few. Now, however, if you look at all of these developments through sort of same lens, you do see some similarities, and I think that's what makes it interesting to see also what happens in these other sectors. Can we also learn from that for the development of worker cooperatives? Now, if we look at a very basic model, we can see what is going on when people form this sort of collectives. On the one hand, people get together. They start from a collectivity of members, so a group of people. The word members is very important here. It means that you belong to a group, that you don't do this as an individual, and that the group really is an important unit. You decide things in group. It's not a sort of one-off event. No, you really become a member of a group with an intention. And the intention is to create a collectivity of resources, to create it, to use it, to manage it collectively. Now, when you put a group of people together, even if they are members of a group, with a collectivity of resources, you'll easily get something what is called in science a social dilemma. It's basically the choice between the individual short-term gain versus the collective long-term gain. So what do I do as an individual has an impact on the collective and on collective resources. I can choose to especially take care of my own needs, but that's maybe not at the advantage of the collectivity, or I can decide to limit my own needs and take into account the future of the collectivity. It's, I guess, something that is very familiar if you explain it that way to many people. It's well, the whole pandemic was a continuous training in solving social dilemmas, I guess. Now, how do people in a citizen collective, in a cooperative, solve that problem? By developing an institution that on the one hand deals with organizing the access and management of the group, right? So the access to the group, who is a member, who is not a member, what are the conditions, and how do you manage this group? And on the other hand, by designing rules that decide on the use and the monitoring of the resources you hold collectively. Now, the reason why we put this in a sort of in this format is because the ultimate goal of all these organizations is to survive and deal with external impact. Basically, what they strive for is becoming a resilient organization, so that you can deal with demographic, economic, political changes, but also with changes in the group size, for example, with a crisis in the resources, etc. And in the model, in the Cicada model, we focus in particular on the overlap of the 3 domains. And that gives us an insight, I think, in what is really important to make sure that cooperation keeps going, that you achieve this resilient situation. That's on the one hand, keeping an eye on the utility. So making sure that the use of the resources remains useful, that the resources remain useful for all its members, and that people can continue to participate even if their own situation changes, so they stay loyal to the organization. On the other hand, social equity, extremely important. It refers to the possibility of individual members to participate in the organization, to, for example, have a say in local meetings, being involved in decision-making, etc. But also very important is efficiency, making sure that the resources are managed in such a way that they are not overused, that you don't go towards what they call tragedy of the commons. So this is basically how you can analyze also the worker cooperatives. Just going to skip that one, by looking at who is the member, what kind of resources do people have, and how do they organize this. Now, this is just an overview of what could be the members, what could be the resources. It's not really exhaustive, it's just an impression, and what could be the institutional archetypes, as we call them. And basically, if you look at workers, institutional collective action, which involve workers, it's basically the members are usually the laborers or producers, so people act as often in a double function as well. It's the resources are capital, in many cases the knowledge they share, the labor they share, so security, insurance, as in, for example, those mutuals, those Breadfunds, but also other services. If you think, for example, of SMART, which is a sort of worker cooperative, but also platform cooperative, the main thing there, what they share is the creation of services for their members. Now, increasingly, especially with the rise of these platform cooperatives, we also see that data and the accompanying algorithms are becoming a collective resource and are becoming interesting also to manage as a resource by these organizations, because those resources really hold a lot of value. But also the network among these workers is important. One of the striking things about these mutuals, these Breadfunds, for example, is that people are not just members because they can get an insurance payment if they get sick, but also because they can exchange jobs with other members of the Breadfund. So, for example, in times when you don't have time to take an additional job, you can give it to somebody else, but later on get some work back from that person. So it works also as a sort of collectivity of workers with similar jobs who don't just exchange insurance money, but also jobs within their group. If we look at institutional archetypes which appear in this sector, we're talking mainly about worker cooperatives, both physical and digital, those mutuals, but also the labor unions are to a great extent comparable and would fit this model. Now, one of the advantages of looking through this very abstract lens to that concrete development I showed in the beginning, it's a bit of a contrasting exercise we're doing here, is that we can learn also from past developments. And if we look at the past 1,000 years, I wasn't planning to give you a history lesson here, but if you take a very long perspective, it becomes interesting to see how over time other institutions for collective action developed. And we see development already in the early modern age until the middle of the 19th century, when most of these organizations have disappeared. And you see the rise of many cooperatives which still exist today, like the Rabobank and the Achmea, etc. They really originated in the late 19th century. And today we see a very diverse development of in very many different sectors, and we see things happening. I'm not going to explain too much about this, but what is interesting is to look at the changes in what we call scaling strategies. So, okay, there's not that many worker cooperatives today, but what kind of strategy could those that are there, together with, for example, the development in mutuals, what kind of strategy could they follow in order to become bigger and have more impact? And I'm talking about impact in two ways. I'll explain it in a moment. So what is an effective strategy there? Now, if we look at the history, development over time, we see a number of things. Two very important changes are taking place right now in how these institutions for collective action develop themselves. And I think two changes that really can be used to strengthen the current development. One is that we currently see a network strategy developing. So in previous times, so I was just talking very briefly about what happened in the early modern time, organizations stayed quite small and wanted to stay small because that gave them social control as an instrument to make sure that people did not overuse their collective resources. So they stayed small, and if they became too large, they split and they became more specialized. And in that way, a lot of smaller organizations developed, but they didn't work together to defend their organizations, for example, to national governments. In the 19th century, you see the nation state development, and they don't really like all these small independent organizations, so they abolish them and they disappear. In the second wave, from which we have the big Rabobank, for example, or Achmea right now, we see something else going on. They also start very small with small boerenleenbanken, for example, in the Netherlands, with small units of mutual insurance. But they all group together, they merge, and they become larger. But becoming larger can also mean that you lose that social equity, that you don't have the instruments anymore to involve your members in the organization. So that's a real threat to the future of the cooperative. It's very hard to manage in a normal hierarchical strategy, hierarchical organization, to manage it as a cooperative and to make sure that everyone is still involved. Now, currently, we see another development, which is among these new forms of collectives, which is actually really fascinating because it sort of combines the best things of the first and the second waves. They combine staying small without losing with a network strategy. They stay small, they don't merge with other organizations. It's really striking how local all these organizations stay, but they do unite. For example, you see the energy cooperatives uniting in Reskoop or Energie Samen. They have their sort of networks. You see Nederland Zorgt voor elkaar as a network of care cooperatives. So you see developments there that are really, really taking into account that these organizations prefer to stay small, but do need each other to grow as a movement. And that's really something striking and well, in a way, hopeful also about what's happening. Now, at the same time, we see something else happening, which is also quite new. So these are bottom-up formed organizations that are very local. If you look at Elinor Ostrom's design principles, she talks about how locally embedded these organizations need to be to stay close to the needs, to the utility of their members. So you do see they stay local, but a lot of citizens do have difficulties in setting up these organizations. And there are some network organizations that found a solution to that. They started with a sort of franchise model. You see it already in the mutual sector, and the Breadfunds are the organizations behind the Breadfunds. And they really offer a model that you can apply as a local group of self-employed. So they use a sort of franchise model, which you accept or not. And if you accept it, there's some rules that go with it. For example, you don't become larger than 50 members. There's also other types of mutual insurance that try to mimic it, but it doesn't always work. This is how the way in which the franchise model is set up is very important, you know, for its scaling capacities. Now, we also see it in the farming sector, for example, in Herenboeren is a system like that, whereby one specific model of farmers producing food for members who self-harvest is developed all over the Netherlands among groups of citizens. So it's really an interesting model that can also help to speed up the spread of these collectives. But again, we don't see the network strategy nor the franchise model appearing in the sector of the worker cooperatives. To some extent, you do see it among the platform cooperatives. For example, the co-op cycle model is one of those models that is spreading. And organizations like Airbnb are, of course, also trying to do that. But I don't think it's very similar yet to what you see in other sectors. Now, the question also is, if you look at the past, the staying small has not proven a very sustainable solution for those collectives. They were abolished by governments in the 19th century. So yeah, if you stay small, can it really work? Don't you need to become larger as an organization, as what took place with that merger strategy? So you can wonder, is it really effective to stay alive if you use a network strategy? And well, the truth is, it probably is. Especially in the energy sector, we see some evidence that a network strategy can be a game changer to develop, well, to have impact, at least. Especially in Germany, we've seen that impact in the energy sector. There really a large part of the the renewable energy was provided in 2012 already by citizens. And it really gave a great push to their Energiewende. And well, it might be something that could be achieved also in other countries. Now, the question is also whether a growing movement as such in whatever sector can also have an impact not just on society at large by changing the resource governance, but also achieve change through its own members. And that's a question we don't really have an answer to yet, but I think a very important and very interesting one. Basically, it's the question whether this type of cooperative model, whether the cooperative as a model can bring about fundamental change also through its members. There is some literature specifically about spillover effects, as we call them, of worker cooperatives, in particular spill over on their behavior outside of the cooperative. So do people who work in a worker cooperative, do they become more cooperative in their other life, so to speak, outside of their job? Do they participate more in, for example, political parties or participatory democracy, etc.? There's no clear answer to that yet. I think it's a task for researchers to study that, but it's definitely possible. And it's also interesting, I think, to see that that is a topic that has been studied among worker cooperatives and that really could make a difference. So if people for their daily work are engaging in a cooperative, they would probably spend more time in the cooperative and thus maybe have a greater effect on their behavior than when they're part of an energy cooperative, for example, where intensive participation is usually not necessary. So the worker cooperative there, I think, creates opportunities to be schools of democracy, so to speak, but we don't know whether that's actually the case or what kind of instruments within the work cooperative lead to such a situation. So I think there's a lot of potential still there in the among as a model for organizing work, and a lot to be learned also from other cooperative developments, both in the Netherlands and elsewhere. And I'll stick to that. That's just additional slides, don't worry about it.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tina, for this great presentation. And I think now we can just move straight forward to the Q&A and to the discussion part. So everybody who has a question or comment to Tina's presentation or to the earlier Marika's talk, please just raise your hand, or if you're not able to speak, just put the question in the chat and I'll read it out loud. But exactly, so whoever would like to intervene, please go ahead. I already saw in the chat that Damian has posted a question, so just maybe it's the best if Damian, you just like
of course.
just
I'm also
yeah.
wondering maybe what Jan thinks of this, because he's from the FNV. But Tina was suggesting that there could also be a network strategy beyond only cooperatives. So with the other institutional archetypes, such as unions and mutuals together. But I'm wondering if there would be actually willingness to do so, or if their differences would more result in competition and conflict. I mean, I could see FNV teaming up with Schoon Gewoon, because Schoon Gewoon employs its worker members. But I guess it would be a bit more difficult with the mutuals, with the Breadfunds, and especially even more so with something like werkvereniging, which I think the FNV has not the best relationship with.
Great, thanks so much, Damian. Would anyone else would like to follow up on that before I ask Tina and Marika to respond? Also, okay, Lisa.
Just throwing this in, I'd be very interested to also hear Marika's explanation for why you think there are so few worker cooperatives. So maybe you could combine this also in your answer. Thank you for both presentations.
Okay, great. So yes, Marika, please go ahead, and then Tina, you can respond after.
Okay, maybe I'll leave the first question to Tina, and the second question is the reason why are there so few cooperatives in the Netherlands. Well, as I explained, we did not conduct any research about the reason, so this is on a personal note. My guess would be might be two reasons at least. I think the first one is maybe three: lack of publicity. If you know people who work for a worker cooperative, word spreads, and they are ambassadors, and you have a party and you hear about workers being happy in their worker cooperative. It's the way it goes. So it has to start somewhere, and it's still lean and mean in the Netherlands. So I think that might be reason one: lack of publicity, lack of information, maybe. So I think that might be something us being NCR, well, maybe we can do something about that one. The second one, we are not in control. That one is was some research done by Hofstede Insights, and results are concerning the elements of characteristics of the European people. And us being Dutch people, we score very high, 80%, on aspects of individualism. We always say, well, we want to decide ourselves on how to act. So if you form a cooperative, it's a verb to cooperate. Many people find that verb very difficult. So that might be a reason. The third reason is there are no incentives coming from our government, and an incentive might be information, publicity, but also tax incentives and maybe even legal incentives. I'm not sure whether you have heard about the, I'll have to look it up, the Marcora's law. You know about that one? It's a very interesting law. Several countries in Europe have adopted this one, or some kind of similarity to that one. It's a law that permits employees to do a workers' buyout. So imagine the situation when a company goes bankrupt and has to close, or their former owner retires. So workers will get unemployed. So to prevent this from happening and to stimulate the workers to continue participating in the working process, this law allows these workers to convert their allowance into a purchase sum, to the buyout of the assets of the company. So this is an incentive made by the government. So it is law in Italy, and they are discussing this law in Britain, and I think also in Spain and maybe France or Greece. It's also some kind of law. We don't. So why? It's not a vivid thing in the Netherlands, unfortunately. So these are the three reasons I had to come up with, but maybe you want to share your thoughts on this aspect. So now we have two questions going together, the FNV question and the reasons why there are so few worker cooperatives in the Netherlands. And maybe after that I can share some information with you about the worker cooperative Schoongewoon, because unfortunately Thijs not able to join us, so I can try to share some information to give you a nice example of a 100% worker cooperative and how this works. So who wants to add on reasons why there are so few cooperatives in the Netherlands for workers, and real workers, not freelancers, employees?
I think to be honest, that to a large extent, the need for them to set up has also been avoided by the polder model, basically. To a large extent, I think this has really sort of eliminated the need to do so. But of course, once you see that falling apart, and also some provisions or at least some services being liberalized, then you do see the development, for example, of these. It's a bit like, as I showed in the beginning, the overview. Some of these organizations, such as the Breadfunds, emerge because there is no alternative. There is no alternative that is accessible. There, of course, you can get insurance through commercial organization, but it's simply too expensive. But I would actually really like to hear from the FNV representative here. What kind of perspective do they have on this development? And also Daniel's question, I found it really intriguing. I would like to hear the answer to that. Is that person still there?
Jan, please go ahead.
Yes, please go ahead. Well, thank you very much. But yeah, you expect a lot of me. I'm from the government sector of the FNV, and I wouldn't say that I can speak for the FNV on this theme. It's actually one of the reasons that I am interested in this democratizing work network, because of the questions that it involves for trade unions. It's clear that the world of work is changing, and yeah, it's very interesting and challenging for trade unions how to react to that, and that's one of the reasons that I'm very interested in this team, and also others within the FNV. But I think in general, yeah, trade unions, that they are mostly pretty much traditional. I heard Tine say that, yeah, perhaps it's even the polder model, and you could say perhaps even still the strong position of trade unions that perhaps prevents, yeah, developments, yeah, from a more corporate economy towards a more cooperative economy. But I think it's very important for unions to reflect on this. And you see this from the other side, because we seem to be very fond of cooperatives and worker cooperatives, but you see trade unions struggle with platform work. And the strategy until now has been to, yeah, to try to, yeah, to get employee status for platform workers. And yeah, well, at least what I wonder is if that is the only or the best strategy. And what I've understood is that, well, even labor law now also extends labor law. So not only that you fall under the protection and safeguarding of labor law when you have the employee status, and that is defined by subordination and control, but also if you are in, well, more precarious conditions, but you are not able to, yeah, to bargain your position. So also as a self-employed, in fact, you are, yeah, imposed to some work, and you are not in the condition to bargain. And well, if I understood well, but Vladimir and a lot of you know much more about labor law. Labor law is also extending this, and yeah, I think it can be complementary for trade unions to follow this strategy, and perhaps yeah, to rethink, to reflect on the position. So it's more a matter of, yeah, how do you see the role of trade unions internal in a corporate system, where you try to rebalance the power relations, yeah, or that you empower workers themselves, whatever their status, employee status or self-employed or whatever, you empower the workers to be in a position, yeah, to have more an equal, more power balance and more. So yeah, I think that's an important question for trade unions, for the future, to think about these yeah, developments in the world of work. But it's only the beginning. I think trade unions are not, at the moment, very ambiguous. So they defend more or less the yeah, the rights and the positions of workers with employee status, and don't know really how to yeah, how to position self-employed or precarious workers, or are even ignorant about it.
Great. Thank you so much, Jan. I would pick up on a discussion that I see that develops in the chat, and Patricia and Damian have already intervened. Actually, I've been thinking also in this direction, because it's, yeah, there is some sort of an inherent tension between labor law and regulation and unions and cooperatives. I mean, for two reasons mainly. First, within cooperatives, of course, even those worker cooperatives that are based on very horizontal democratic sort of solidarity, collectivity principles, in course of time, all kinds of internal organizational dynamics of subordination and hierarchies develop, and then some sort of regulation of these internal work relations is necessary. And then also the second reason, which has been pointed out by Damian and Patricia in the chat, that very often in some countries or jurisdictions, the cooperative form is used precisely to deprive workers from basic labor rights. So we have that in Italy with the so-called cooperatives of convenience, where people are just using the cooperative form to employ people as, to classify people as members and not as employees. Has developed in all kinds of industries. We know it from the meat processing industry, but I don't know, Patricia might know more but it's definitely a phenomenon. I've read a study in Brazil about taxi drivers cooperatives that sort of took the similar dynamics. So I think this issue of the cooperative idea and how it sort of can materialize in reality in particular conflicts, and that it's definitely an issue. And I totally see where a connection to already existing and maybe more traditional sort of collective sort of forms of collectively organized labor is relevant, and it's definitely that something should have a space for discussion in the cooperative discourse. But I don't know if Patricia and Damian would like to add to that, because I dragged them into my own discourse through the things that they were saying in the chat.
I don't really have anything to add. I will just post a paper also on these. They're also called false cooperatives in Italy. I will post that in the chat, but I don't have anything else to add to it.
Yes, that would be great.
Maybe to detach the problem from the Italian context, which of course, I mean, is an important context, but it's not that they are problematic because they happen to be in Italy. But I think the cooperatives, well, in the cooperatives, the workers become at the same time labor and capital, right? And they operate within a market, and the market, so they are often in competition with firms. And so actually they are embedded within a political economy which remains completely capitalistic, which puts pressures on them as on any other organization. And this is very clear in the Italian case. I think what Tine told us, thank you so much, Tine, for the presentation. I think it's very rich and very many things going on also developing from which we can think further, right? And you mentioned the SMART case, and I just a paper out on this SMART case with a co-author, Marianne de Koster. And what is interesting about the SMART case is that it starts from the precarious workers who are not covered by the social security. So they are project workers, right? And so you have this very strong polder model, in the Belgian version then, but they fall outside it because they are self-employed. And then you have this negative necessity, as you name it. And from there, they create a collective. But the quite interesting success factor of this case is that they are able, through this collective, to anchor themselves within the social security system, translating this into a regular employment relationship through which the state does then provide social security. And this is a bit tricky, and the trade unions have been really very negative about this trick because you have like, bigger solidarity and then the collective solidarity, and they don't put as much contributions into the global system, but they get the protection out of it. And there you have the contradiction, right? But I think, I think it's very important, but to me, the lessons from that study and also from what I heard today is that we cannot see the cooperative only in terms of governance to the inside, but also always as part of a bigger political economy. Certainly in terms of workers' cooperative. I think for other consumer cooperative, it's actually a different, a really different discussion where you go along with the market, right? You just put all the energies together to be bigger as capital by when you acquire then the goods on the market, which is actually a very effective kind of strategy in some cases. So sorry for the long, I think I was just thinking along with what has been said.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. So every intervention is definitely appreciated. So if anyone else would like to speak, just go ahead. And otherwise, I will invite Tina and Marijke to maybe respond to the things that have been said. But maybe we can take in one intervention. I will leave Lisa's questions for the next round because it's a different topic. but if someone would like to add or follow up on what has been said until now, just go ahead. Okay, then I will just invite Tine and then Marijke to reflect on the discussion.
Do you want me to reflect on what's in the comments or in discussion?
Yeah, on so maybe on these concerns that have been so not the concerns, but the discussion of existing potential tensions between traditional forms of organized labor and this new kind of collective institutions, like also worker cooperatives, and maybe sort of this danger of abusing the cooperative form for undermining workers' rights that has been also commented in the chat and now addressed by Patricia.
Yeah, that's a lot of different things at the same time, of course. And also, I think that, I mean, one of the frustrations, I think, within the broader cooperative movement across Europe is that cooperatives have a fairly different legal structures across Europe. That really makes a huge difference. It really makes a huge difference, for example, in terms of internal democracy, whether there is a one man, one vote system or not. That of course influences a lot the power abuse you could have within a cooperative. In the Netherlands, for example, you can play around with that. There's no strict rules. The same goes for other aspects of a cooperative organization. For example, there has been a recent change in 2019 in Belgium of the cooperative legislation, which makes it stricter in terms of societal goals and internal organization. It forces cooperatives to become more aligned with the original cooperative principles, the ICA principles, than it used to be. Whereas in the Netherlands, it's just the next country, it's a neighboring country. The rules are very, very broad, very flexible. So it really, whether the objectives such as internal democracy, flattening power relationships or not, what kind of effect these have really depends on the limits, to a large extent at least, depend on what kind of legal boundaries there are within countries. So that's really something to look into. And I think in the Netherlands, anything goes. You can set up a worker cooperative that is extremely internally democratic if you want, but you could also do the opposite. So in that sense, it's difficult to compare the situation in the Netherlands with other countries. Again, also, as I think Patricia mentioned in the chat, there are, for example, laws that stimulate indeed the setting up of worker cooperatives in some countries, and that offer benefits for those who set it up. So that might also explain to some extent why there are less or more, not less, but more cooperatives in some countries than here. But one of the things that I really find interesting when you look at the whole cooperative development in the Netherlands, and that's why I keep presenting it in this broad spectrum and these developments of on the one hand, cooperatives being developed on the basis of, well, a lack of alternatives. On the other hand, lack of opportunities. In the best case, cooperatives emerge because it's a positive choice. It's a choice for internal democracy. It's a choice for involving people in, for example, in investing in renewable energy, in more humane care, in being more closely involved in your working environment. But as we see it in the Netherlands, it's not always a positive choice, but it's a choice because nothing else works. I think the choice that was made years ago by the founder, who's no longer with us, Raymond Schuring of Schoon Gewoon, was a positive choice. It was a choice. We can do it differently. We can change the way in which we work together with our cleaners. Well, it hasn't really been followed so far. Maybe because maybe there's also a need there for a sort of franchise model that might help to distribute this kind of worker cooperative. That worked very well with the Breadfunds, for example. But with the Breadfunds, it also has a lot of limits. We have to be fair about that. It's not really a real mutual insurance. It's limited to 2 years, the donations you can get. So I think, well, I would position that as a solution out of sort of misery, out of, there's no alternatives. And if we can believe what was in the documents by the documents that were left behind on a train by the negotiators of the current government, this insurance of self-employed will be on the agenda again. I'm not sure if it's really going to happen. Maybe Jan knows more about that. But it's an interesting format, and mutual insurances have been absolutely vital in building the welfare state. Also in the Netherlands, it's been crucial to create well-being for workers and to create, among factory owners, etc., but also among politicians. The idea that we need to take care of people when they work, it's very essential, but it's a 19th century phenomenon, so to speak. I think it's been very essential, but I'm not sure if the same is going to happen now. I think also people have other requirements, they're less loyal to their job, so we'll probably have to come up with a different solution there. And now I'm trying to look into the future, which I'm not very good at because I'm a historian. So.
Great, thank you. Marijke, would you like to add something to this?
Katrina, that was a very nice argument. People in the Netherlands are less loyal to their jobs. I didn't think of that one. I made a...
No, that's an increasing development that people, well, that's not just in the Netherlands, that's overall that there's less loyalty to your job. I mean, it's not like it used to be in 40 years ago.
No, like my father, 30 years at Philips. Very nice what you say. Thank you. Maybe this is a nice moment to reflect on schoongewoon, just to give a nice example in addition to what Tina told us. Schoongewoon is a cooperative of 100% workers who are working in the cleaning industry. Years ago, founding father came up with the idea to assemble all workers in the cleaning industry, in this cooperative, bringing the result that they were in control in a very difficult market, in a very competitive market, in control of their working conditions, the products that they used, working schedules, etc., etc. This works, but this is also in a sector, in a market where the working conditions were bad. So I think this example proves that what you told us, Tina, that there has to be a need to come up with the idea of a cooperative. I think maybe in this sector there was a need to do something in favor of the members, former workers. So they came up with the idea of a cooperative local. And after that, when it was a success, they created more cooperatives locally. So I think there are now about 5 or 6 local worker cooperatives, all active in the cleaning industry, all controlled democratically by the workers who appoint and dismiss their board. And above these 5 or 6 locally organized cooperatives, there is some kind of an umbrella cooperative. that holds the franchise formula, and that assists the local cooperatives in administrative things, all that. But the local cooperatives are the contractors for the assignment in the cleaning industry. So this is Schoon Gewoon, a very nice example of how this specific type of worker cooperatives is a success in the Netherlands. I think
Great.
this is short, might have been the story Tvaga might have told us. And the umbrella cooperative is formed also by the members' council. And the members of the members' council come from the local cooperatives, and they also appoint the board of the umbrella cooperative. Very nice to know.
Thank you both. Thank you, Tina and Marijke. So I think we're maybe I'll ask Lisa to raise the question that you put in the chat, and then we can take it in the discussion. So Lisa, would you like to? Oh, I can also read it out, but I think it's nicer if you just.
No, thank you. I mean, this is just bringing in a new dimension that has been implicit in lots of the discussions already about risk. And if you look at sort of older economic explanations for why there are fewer worker cooperatives than you would otherwise expect, there's often an explanation in terms of risks, namely that workers don't want to put all their eggs in one basket. So they don't actually want to invest both their capital and their labor in one organization, because if it fails, they lose everything. And I guess one thing that I'd like to add, and that was sort of implicit also in one of Marijke's answers, is that this is, of course, also has a kind of cultural dimension, sort of what are you used to doing in terms of risk taking. And if everyone has a safe job and the risk is all with the companies, then no one expects that it might be part of normal life that you risk part of your capital in a cooperative. So I guess there's a sort of social effect, network effect. But I was just wondering how exactly this comes in, and it seems sort of implicit in your presentation, Tina, that somehow the model of spreading successful forms could probably reduce some of the risks, because you would not only spread a legal form, you would also spread a kind of message that, well, this has worked elsewhere, so you actually have less risk when you're adopting this and starting something else in a different location. So there's a sort of signaling that that reduces the risk, because well, it has worked in Utrecht, so why shouldn't it work in Groningen? So yeah, but I'm just reflecting on the relation between these older explanations in terms of risk. Are they still relevant? What kind of cultural dimensions might they have? And how they relate to Tina's suggestion to think about this in terms of networks and forms that can be adopted and so on. Thank you.
It's the risk question is a very important one for many different reasons. I was just looking now for the slides, but I can't find them very quickly, of a paper I wrote together with Eva Vriends on the Breadfunds, which was exactly about the relationship with risk aversion, etc. I can look it up later on for you. But I think in many cases, one of the prime motivators for people to actually set up an organization like this is risk sharing. Yeah, you see that in the historical context, you still see it today. And risk sharing, for example, also in an energy cooperative, of course, it's the only way to do so, because you're not going to set up that windmill on your own, but also you also share the negative side effects, not just of the capital investment. You share the risk there. But also, for example, if you set up a windmill on a joint patch of land, you will have some negative effects on the quality of your land. So people also share that kind of side effect of investing in renewable energy. However, I think it is, well, not however, but we do also see that in the historical context, it often starts with a motivation to share risks, but they often add more risks to that. So having a multi-purpose organization whereby you share risks, for example, if you look at the historical context, you see a lot of guilds emerging, and you see that they share risks in terms of buying goods together. So, and they share costs there as well, but they also, I mean, the guilds are the organization, the organization where for example, the fire insurance was developed. So they are the origin of the fire insurance. But it's a combination often of using the critical mass to pool income, to pool finances, and to be able to create something with risk sharing. Now, if you combine these elements, you get a stronger organization. And I think one of the real concerns towards platform cooperatives is exactly the question whether people are actually using these cooperatives to, they use them enough. So do they use them only for gigs that are for a very small limited part of their income? Or do they depend enough on the organizations to both feed the organizations enough, so to create enough critical mass, both also financially, to make sure that there's enough revenue within the cooperative? And do they rely enough on them to make sure that they are also loyal to the cooperative? So it's a combination of creating critical mass, enough members who bring in enough capital, who bring in enough resources, in combination with enough dependency. If you don't really depend on the cooperative, you're not really going to be very loyal probably either. So how do you combine those? It's a difficult, that's completely the resilience question. How do you make sure that people are getting that utility out of the cooperative? If you don't get a lot of utility, if you don't depend very much on the organization, well, how motivated will you be to use that social equity to make sure that you're also part of the organization, that the organization can also rely on you for monitoring, for example? And having the right rules in place there and the right combination of resources is, I think, the vital one. But there's no set recipe for each sector, at least not, we don't know of it yet. But one of the things we're also looking at in a larger Fiji project is, for example, the impact of the member size and the member heterogeneity. If you have a lot of people demanding the same type of resource of for example, imagine a bread fund with that consists only out of people who are 65 plus, so to speak, who might have immediate need of the resources, then you're in trouble. So you need a good variety, a good heterogeneity in terms of age distribution among your members. I don't think it's something that the bread funds themselves actually pay attention to when they get new members involved, but it is quite important. As long as things go well, there's no problem, but when things go wrong, it becomes a problem. So far, so good for the bread funds, but maybe in due time they need to pay attention to that. Competition with yeah, sure. You take absolutely. It's this, yeah, definitely. Good point. Yeah, I think we definitely need to, in cooperative studies, there's not a lot of attention going to the balance between all these elements, and I think that's very important. It's usually about what kind of growth lines can you have, when do you, when do you develop what, and there's some models for that, but how do you make sure that everything is in balance and stays in balance, even when things change externally, for example? That is, I think, a great challenge. And now we're already past our time.
Yes, so no, this was great. I really enjoyed this exchange. But that's right. So we are coming slowly to the close of today's event. I think it's shortly after 6. It's a great timing. It was a beautiful exchange. So it was a pity we missed Thijs in the end, because an actual insight on the Schongewoon would have been like a very nice addition to everything that we've been talking about. But even this conversation, we had great contributions by Tina and Marijke, a lot of food for thought, and actually many important questions have been raised in the debate. So I would really like to thank Tina and Marijke especially for taking the time to be with us today, but also to everybody in the audience for asking great questions in the chat or in through the microphone, or however we say. Never mind. So many thanks, and we have another possibly webinar scheduled next month, and we will follow up with more information on that in due time. So